Hello and welcome to the Sacral Circle, where we are healing sexual trauma collectively and lovingly. I'm your host, Janie Terrazas, and I'll be interviewing individuals from all walks of life who have faced sexual trauma or abuse in one form or another and triumphed over their adversity. On every episode, a guest will deliver inspirational support, words of comfort, and empowering healing advice. They'll courageously share how their experiences impacted their lives and what they did to reclaim their mind, body, heart, and soul. Be sure to subscribe to my podcast, The Sacral Circle. Just search Sacred Stories on iTunes. I want to thank our listeners for joining us today on The Sacral Circle, the self-love haven where we leave judgment at the door. And today we are blessed to have the wonderful Vanessa Eames. She goes by the Absolute Alchemist. She is a pure spirit channeler, and she's a mother of four, and she has endured a variety of sex trauma, and she now assists others to overcome their trauma. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes.
I'm so grateful that you're doing this work and just putting this out there. I think it's so crucial that we're able to actually talk about our trauma without, guilt and shame and judgment and condemnation. I just know that that's what perpetuates the problem, and we really need to bring an end to this. And that, awareness really is what helps to do that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Awareness is everything, and us coming together and coming out of that shame and that secrecy, because as long as we stay in the dark, we'll never be able to experience the light. And it's about you taking this time to share your story. And you are so gifted at what you do. I had a beautiful session with her, and she truly does understand what it means, to tap into what I like to call Holy Spirit, or that sacred spirit. And she has been feeling and experiencing this relationship with spirit since she was a really young girl. So please, share your story. I don't know where you would like to start, but wherever you would like to start, perfect.
Well, it's kind of funny. It really, it does coincide because I was what I, consider, born awake. And I do think to some level or degree that everybody is. And I think that as we go along, we get conditioned by our circumstances, our surroundings, our relationships, and we kind of just lose that connection. And for whatever reason, I can't even say that it was something that I purposely did. Obviously, I was a child and didn't really know how to stay connected. But for whatever reason, I was just able to keep that connection ongoing. And so when it comes to the experiences that I had with sexual trauma, I can say that as far as, physical memories of the trauma itself, I do, know that for the longest time that just completely went away. And I think that that's the, story of many people that have experienced trauma in their childhood, is that there's a lot of memories that are just lost. And I kind of have a theory on that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I'll just start with where it kind of began. My earliest recollection, and I say that because I was told stories by my family later of things that they heard that they were suspicious of. But my first sexual traumatic abuse came from my biological father. And my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. So it's kind of funny that that's also my earliest remembrance of hearing from spirit. When I was a kid, I remember just calling it the voice. Oh, the voice is talking to me. There's this voice that talks to me. And I always knew that I needed to get to a quiet space. And for me, it was the backyard of my grandmother's house. Because my parents were divorced, my mother couldn't raise me and my sister on her own financially. So we often lived with my grandparents. And for me, the quiet space was in the backyard on the swing set. There was a gigantic tree that hung over the swing set, and I would sit and I would just swing. And I remember just listening to the voice. What was the voice telling me? What do I need to do? Kind of thing. And I remember that's where I really got my guidance. And so I was very tuned in from the time that I was 5, even though I was going through this separation with my parents. And my dad quickly remarried. I mean, like when he left my mom, he was instantly remarried to my stepmom. And so that was another thing that I was kind of dealing with as a child. Like, I don't really understand. My parents aren't together anymore. And then on top of that, I've got this new stepmom. And my sister is 5 years younger than me, so she was a newborn at the time. So I was dealing with a lot as a 5-year-old. But I had that guidance, and I felt tuned in all the time. And I just always had this sense of peace. So fast forward to my earliest recollection of my father sexually abusing me. I was 12 years old, and I would go to his home every other weekend. And my dad and my stepmom had went out to a party, and my dad was a pretty wild character. He's on the other side now, but he was a pretty wild character, and he was into he was a biker, and he was into, drugs and alcohol and all of that, and just very self-harming and reckless individual, and very angry. And he had two faces. He was either super angry or he was the life of the party, very charismatic. So I had those two extremes with him, and you never really knew what you were going to get. And so anyway, I was asleep on the couch, and they came in from a party sometime in the middle of the night. And I remember hearing them come in, but I don't, I didn't fully wake up. It's like I heard them stumbling through the house, and that was it. And then I went back to sleep, and I woke up to my dad molesting me. And I remember just thinking in my head, like, if I just don't look at him, maybe this won't be real. Like, maybe I'm just dreaming. Maybe I'm imagining this. This can't really be happening. And that was kind of how I dealt with it, is I just buried my face into the pillow, and I never turned around. But then when it was over, I quickly jumped up from the couch. And once I knew that he was back in the bedroom, I took the phone into the kitchen, which was the furthest place in the house. And I whispered a call to my mother. And that's when I was told by my mom. I was crying, and I was asking her to come and pick me up. And that's when I was told by my mother that she did not even know where my dad lived. And that was terrifying, because I needed to be rescued. I needed to get out of there. I needed to go home. I needed to be safe. And I remember, like, it just felt like all of my life left and drained out of my body, because I was so terrified to stay in the house. All I knew is I had to get out of there. And so I got angry with her. She said, "I'm sorry." She kept apologizing. "Are you sure you didn't just have a bad dream?" And I just hung up on her. And I ran out the house, and I went down the street where my stepbrother was spending the night with childhood friends that I had grown up with, and they were sleeping in their father's camper. And so I went to the camper, and I opened the door, and I was trying to wake my brother up without waking the other boys up, because I didn't want them to know what had happened. And he wouldn't wake up. I was saying his name over and over and over, and he wouldn't wake up. And so I just decided I'm going to walk home. Now,
oh my
to give
gosh.
you a mental picture, obviously it's like 2-3 o'clock in the morning. It's sometime in the middle of the night, and I'm a 12-year-old girl, and I'm walking, and this is in a not so good part of town. It's in the south side of downtown Dallas. It just is not a good area for me to be in, but I had to flee. I had to get out of there. And I began to walk down the road, and I remember thinking, I need protection. So I looked over, and I saw this 2x4. So I pick up this 2x4, and I think, if anybody comes to me, I'm just going to, defend myself. And I saw headlights behind me coming up, a car pulling up behind me in this gravel parking lot that I was walking through. And I was terrified, because I instantly knew, because I've always had this psychic connection. It's my father. I knew before I even saw the headlights, like I could feel his presence coming towards me.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I turn around, and I see that it's the car, and he jumps out, and he's like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Get back, get in this car. I'm taking you home. Like, I can't believe you're out here. What are you thinking? This is so dangerous." And so I reluctantly put the 2x4 down and got in the car. And there was a little, like a workshop. It was an auto mechanic that was on the way to their house, and he stopped in the parking lot of the auto mechanic shop, and he turns on this, it's a Christian radio station, right? And my dad was so far from anything religious, like never really talked about God except for the fact that he had an encounter with God while he was in prison at one point, but it wasn't a part of his daily life, right? So he turns on this music, and he begins to tell me how, sometimes we have dreams that seem so real, that we think that they actually happen. Oh yeah. Yeah. So we go through probably like 10 minutes of that, and I just kept looking out the window. I wouldn't look in his eyes. I wouldn't look at his face. And I just said, can you just take me, back to the house? I just disrupted him at some point because he was just like, I could feel it, like him trying to interrupt, like in my brain, like I could feel the energy that was coming.
Wow.
And I just said, can you please take me back to the house? And so we got there, my stepmom was sitting up, and as soon as I came in, she was like, oh my gosh, she comes running to me, and she's crying and she's holding me. I was so scared. I can't believe you left. I'm like, we didn't know where you went. And what happened? And she starts questioning me. And I said, I guess I had a bad dream.
Wow, man.
So the next day they took me back home, and of course my mom, had already been on the phone with my stepmom. She called as soon as I hung up on her, which unbeknownst to me, I was already out of the house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she called and said, Vanessa called me. She was terrified. She wanted me to pick her up. I don't know what happened, so they have this conversation. So of course, as soon as I, get home, here's my dad and my stepmom get out of the car with me to walk me up to the porch. Here comes my granny and my mom, and they're standing on the porch, and I've got all four adults questioning me now. Like, what happened, And I gave the answer that my dad gave. I had a bad dream. I had a nightmare.
I know that your mom said she didn't know where your dad lived. Who had dropped you off at your dad's house?
They always picked me up. They always, either my stepmom or my dad would drive out, and it was about a 40 to 45 minute drive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was going to say. The other part of that picture is here I am, my 12-year-old self. I'm like, I'm going to walk home. Well, it's a 45-minute drive. So you can imagine. And I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue how to walk home. Like, I just, you know what I'm saying? There was no sense in it, but other than I got to get out of here.
Of course.
And so
that's what would happen too. It's just like you just want to flee, and you're not thinking rationally. You're just like, get me out of here. I need to be safe.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yes.
So they drop you off. You
and
have
so
4 adults questioning you.
Yeah, I've got 4 adults questioning me. And of course I just give that, hey, I guess I had a bad dream because, obviously, first of all, I would love to be able to tell my mom and my granny, more especially my granny, because my granny and I were very close, because my mom, being a single mom working all the time, my granny was the one that was there for me, the very most. And so she was always my best friend. And so I wanted to be able to tell her, but you're asking me in front of my dad. And then somewhere along the line, after I was home, I remember my granny coming back and approaching me one-on-one and asking me. And at that point, I think that it had already set in, I didn't know how to think through what had happened. I didn't know, what really to think about it at all. But what I felt in my body was that this was going to cause a lot of chaos and wreak havoc, and it was going to make my mom spiral out of control. So another kind of additional thing to this is what a lot of people need to know about my story is also, one of the things that I had to overcome about being able to tell people about my abilities and open up to that, people about that, is because both of my parents were diagnosed with mental illness. So to tell people that I was hearing voices when your mother is schizophrenic is a very tough thing to do. So in that moment, I wanted to protect her. And I knew that if I told her what had happened, that there wasn't going to be a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that if I told my granny at that time that, she would tell my mom, and then, so I didn't want to keep it from my granny. I felt that I could talk to her about it. However, I was more concerned about the effects on my mother.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very aware of that from 5 years old. I remember being able to hear her thoughts and then having spirit talk to me about it, and explain what was going on and that there was a disruption. And so all I knew as a child is I didn't want to cause more disruption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that set me into a pattern of really spending a profuse amount of time inward, more so than I think that I began in. I was a very outspoken child in the beginning. I was very extroverted. I was very open. But once all of these things started to happen, I really went completely internal. And what I learned from that time, from the time that I was 5 until I was 12, is that what I felt is the only thing that I could trust was the voice, that there was no one else that was stable enough to, share with, to interact with, to be, open and vulnerable, because I was reading everybody's doubts and fears within themselves.
You could read their mental
Mm-hmm.
and emotional state, their bodies.
Yes, yes. And so I would literally hear their thoughts, and then it was like spirit had to come and tell me, educate me on what it meant at my level of understanding, as a child. Obviously, I didn't have a lot of language, or definition to put with things because I had very little life experience. So I just had to trust what spirit was saying. So when, there was also, alcohol in my house, and there was, all those kinds of things. And so before a fight would break out amongst my family, I would hear, spirit say, grab your sister and y'all go to the room and lock, shut and lock the door. And so I would follow those instructions. And then once I did, I would hear the yelling and the screaming and the fighting on the outside of the door. And so I learned at a very young age that I had to trust it. I had to trust the voice, because everything outside of me was so chaotic and, volatile. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't safe. And so that was my safe place, was to trust, the voice. And I would talk to my sister about it, my little sister, and I would say, well, the voice told me this and the voice told me that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So she learned to trust it too. She would be like, well, what's the voice saying now? And so not long after that, my mom started dating a guy from work, and they, moved really quickly. We moved into his townhome, and shortly after, he began molesting me. And it just started with, hey, come and watch cartoons with me, right? Mm-hmm. And it was always on the bed, and my mom was always somewhere else. And so I remember, my mom being, downstairs, and, things were happening. It would be broad daylight, and she's awake, and everybody's running around and doing stuff. But I am in the bedroom, feeling, almost like, what do I do? Do I scream? Do I say no? Do I, again, because I wanted to be protective of my mother, and now my little sister as well. So I really just felt like I was just, okay, I'm going to take this as long, and I'm going to try to find a way out. Like, that's what I would always do. It's just like, I got to go to the bathroom, or I'm going to get something to eat. I would make some excuse to leave the bedroom.
Yes.
And, so anyway, I remember specifically one time, my mom calling to me from the kitchen. She was making dinner. And I remember just having this wave of just anger and frustration hit me, of like, how can you not know? Because if I, as a young girl, can read these things, if I can know your thoughts, why can't you know mine?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sending this signal, like I remember being able to, I was just sending this signal. And this particular day that happened, she called for me. It was all innocently. She was like, Vanessa, dinner's almost ready. And I remember this wave hit me, and I remember thinking, and I remember in that moment, I felt like I couldn't get up. So I sent this signal. And then all of a sudden her voice changed. She was like, Vanessa, are you okay?
Wow.
And it was like, that's when it really started to hit me. Okay, this is real. Like, I'm not just
Yep.
It was almost like it was solidified to me that I was able to communicate telepathically.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, she heard me. Now come get me. Right? Come in here and catch him red-handed. That's what I wanted. And I didn't feel like I had the power of my own little child body to catch him to get him busted. But this is my way of doing it,
Yes.
And so when she said that, my sister, I heard my sister say, Mama, can I? And then she paused and I started sending a signal to her. And she came busting into the bedroom and he was wearing a robe with nothing on underneath. And he hurries up and throws the robe over himself. Mm-hmm. And my sister said, she paused and she looked puzzled for a second. And she's like, Mom said dinner's ready. And she just turned around and ran down the stairs. So that's my only recollection with him. And then, I had a couple of instances with an uncle that was inappropriate in the swimming pool, picking, and it wasn't just me. And I remember at that point, I grabbed my sister because he was doing it with me and my sister. He was throwing us in the water, but he was picking us up by our bottoms, our crotch with his fingers,
Yes.
And when he did that to me, and then I saw, it was like, okay, I was getting angrier. I could feel the anger starting to build inside of me of why is this happening?
Again,
I'm angry. Yeah. Again. And then, but when I saw him do it to my sister, that is when I was activated. And I grabbed her from him and I looked him dead in his eyes and I said, don't touch her again. And I grabbed her and got out of the pool.
Hell yeah.
So, it was like, okay, I'm done. Nobody's protecting me. I have to protect myself. And now I'm not going to let this happen to my sister. So I went through, teenage years where it was living hell. I kept telling Spirit, don't talk to me anymore because you keep telling me that all of these good things are happening and that I'm good, that I'm beautiful, that I'm worthy, that I'm this, that I'm that. But I don't feel that way. And nobody else knows that about me. You're the only one that knows that about me. And I need somebody outside of me to know that about me. But you haven't convinced me that that's true. So I just want you to shut up talking and I'm just going to live my life and I'm done. I don't even want to have a relationship with you anymore, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. You're cutting it off. Yes.
Yeah, I'm done. I don't want to hear it. And it of course it never stopped. And it was one of those, I just went through my teenage years doing what I was doing, knowing that I was harming myself, knowing that I was being reckless, knowing it was disrupting my peace. But at that point I was in such a state of self-hatred that I didn't care anymore. I just didn't care.
Yeah.
And I watched the girls around me, a lot of girls that I knew had the same thing had happened to them and they were acting very promiscuously. And for me, I was the total opposite. I was kind of going in a direction of, I don't want to have anything to do with guys at all.
Yeah.
But
I also went into that promiscuity space, but you went the opposite direction.
Oh, I went complete opposite, so much so that I started to think that, maybe I'm homosexual. Maybe I just only like girls. Maybe that's, what's happening here.
Yeah.
And so that's when I had I had a couple of experiences in my teenage years, with that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I've been married to a man for 20 years, but that's, there's no judgment there. I'm just saying that it wasn't ever a thought in my mind until that point when I came into that age of where the attraction thing and the hormones are going on. And I just noticed this massive difference between me and the girls that I was friends with. And I knew something had happened to them and I watched them. And I just remember thinking I could never do that. I can't give myself over like that to a man. I didn't want to have a man touching me. Mm-hmm. Even, one that was around my age, I just didn't want it. And so I just went into the really hardcore, angry. I did a lot, that's when I was just fighting all the time. I was on drugs and alcohol, and I was very much kind of like the leader of the pack. We're all rebellious and let's go do rebellious stuff,
Yeah.
And
pack, yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up pregnant at 19. I was in a relationship. It was very back and forth for me as far as like what the relationship looked like. I was very, overly dominant because my mom, the model for her kind of in a relationship was to kind of be the, extreme submissive role. And so I came out because of the abuse, because of what I saw with my mom. I was very dominant in the relationship, and it worked out because he, he didn't want to have any kind of, domination or, strong masculine energy, in the relationship. So it worked out for a time, but, I was 19, he was 21. And so, it was just very young. So I have my first child at 19, and I just remember this extreme protection, perfection mode came over me. Like, I am going to be this perfect parent. My daughter will be so protected. Nothing's going to happen to her. I will make sure that I am her guardian, blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
And I never let anybody watch her. The only person that ever babysat my daughter was my mom. I didn't even let my mother-in-law keep her overnight. I would let her go for a few hours, but she never, kept her for a long, extended period of time. I just had no trust when it came to my child with other people. And it's kind of funny because I'll rewind back when I was pregnant. I had a series of dreams, and there was 6 in a row. Okay, 6 consecutive nights of the exact same dream. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, and I would know that my child was there. My child was born, even though I'm very much, like 7 or 8 months pregnant at the time. And I remember getting up, and the entire house was dark, and I walked through the house, and I went into the living room, and we had a fish tank in there, an aquarium, and it was full of water. It was so beautiful, lots of fish, very peaceful. Well, that was the only light that was on in the room. And I would walk in there looking for my baby because I knew my baby's here. And I would look over the fish tank, and she was just there, just at the top of the water, just happily floating, cooing and making noise. And I was like, oh, my baby. And I would run over there, and I would pick her, swoop her up really fast. And I would start to inspect her. So I would look at her toes, and I looked at her legs, and I looked at her whole body. And then when I got to her right arm, it was extremely deformed, curled up, looking like a cinnamon bun with bones sticking, protruding. It was horrific.
Yes, that's
horrible.
So scary. Oh my God, what a horrible dream. Oh my God. Okay.
I know. And I had it 6 times in a row, and it played exactly the same. And even the third time that I dreamt it, I thought, I know that I'm dreaming this right now. Even in my dream, I was like, I'm dreaming this.
Lucid.
Why can't I stop?
Lucid.
Yeah. And I could not stop the dream. I couldn't stop it. And I remember thinking, what on earth does that mean? What does that even mean? And I remember inquiring, Spirit, what does this mean? It just felt almost like this warning, And so I was terrified for the last 2 months of my pregnancy that my daughter had some kind of birth defect. And I was constantly badgering the doctor, hey, can you please, let's do another sonogram. Is there some kind of blood test? Can I get the amniocentesis? And he's like, there's no need for that. You're perfectly healthy. Everything's fine. Everything looks good. He kept trying to reassure me. And I'm like, no, something's wrong. And sure enough, it was almost time for me to have her. They said that she was breech. Okay. So I was going to have a C-section. And I was so into the whole natural birth process. I'd read all these books. I was super excited about it. Now I'm let down, and I thought, oh, maybe that's what the dream was about. Maybe I was foreseeing that, I was going to have the C-section, right? So I had the C-section, and 2 weeks later, I got an infection in the incision. I asked the doctor, what happened? I was following all the rules. He said, that sometimes it happens in the surgical room. There's just staff is a part of the hospital, and that, happened. And so I went through this whole traumatic thing of having to get my stitches taken out and pack the wound. It was a whole mess. So I'm this whole time, Janie, thinking that that's what this dream was about. Right?
Right.
When my daughter was 2 years old, she came to me and she started saying, I don't know if I could say this. I'm just going to say it. Non-judgmental zone, right? But she came to me and she said, my pee-pee hurts.
Mm.
Now, at this time, Janie, I had just had my second child. I had my little boy, and I was in the middle of a postpartum depression, and here's my daughter starting to cry. And so I said, oh, she's probably just, jealous of the baby. She's trying to adjust. She's only 2. Like, she doesn't know how to share her space. It's okay. That's just what this is. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And without going into details that could be, really probably not helpful to people listening, but you can just only imagine, she ended up describing her molestation to me in words that only a child could describe, but were very accurate about male parts and their function.
Right.
And I knew that she had never experienced anything. I was very protective. I never let her watch anything on TV. I didn't even, I was so careful about even our own sexual, relationships as her parents, in another room. Like, I was very protective. And what had happened was, we had a friend of her dad's come and stay with us for several weeks while he was in transition. And I was pregnant with my son, and I had gestational diabetes, and I would just, it was in the middle of the summer. I had him September 11th. So literally in August, I felt like I was dying,
Yes.
I just couldn't. And then I was sick with diabetes. So I would be sitting on the couch, and I would just literally pass out. And I'm not a person that can sleep sitting up, but I would just fall asleep because I was just that exhausted. One day I woke up, and because he slept on the couch and I had fell asleep on the couch, I woke up like, oh my gosh, where's everybody at? I got up to go to my bedroom, and he was asleep on my bed. She was asleep on the bed too. They were both on the bed asleep, but they weren't super close. Like, they were just in the bed.
Right.
And my heart stopped. But I thought, okay, Vanessa, don't take it there.
Don't jump to conclusions yet.
Let's not do that. And so now he's been gone for several weeks, and here comes my daughter. My PB hurts, and I'm thinking it's her little brother's there. So, she screamed about it so much. I inspected her. Everything looked fine to me. She kept on going. So finally I took her to the doctor, and I said, I need to know, does she have like a UTI or a bladder infection? Like, what is going on? She will not stop crying that her PB hurts. And they checked her out. Everything was fine. And so finally one day, it was like Spirit came and said, I need you to question your daughter, and I want you to stay calm. And I'm like, question her. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard, get the Mickey doll, which she had a big, gigantic Mickey Mouse doll that she just loved. She carried it everywhere. Get the Mickey Mouse doll, and I will tell you. And I'm like, okay. So I grabbed the Mickey Mouse doll. I called my daughter over, and I said, okay, now what? And it's like, it just started flowing, and I just started channeling. And apparently, by the psychologist that I took her to later, all of it was completely the right thing to do. There was no leading and questioning her and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to remain really calm. So just basically using my abilities to get my daughter, free out of this, because she was obviously stuck in this loop of trying to tell me, but she didn't know how.
Yes.
And so she came out and she told me. I thanked her for, sharing that with me. I let her know that, she didn't do anything wrong, but I promised her that Uncle, she called him Uncle by his name, Uncle something. And I just promised her that he would never go near her again. Mm-hmm. And that she would never have to look at him again, face him again, that she was completely safe. And that I was so sorry, that happened. And she said, thank you, Mama. So we go through this really long, drawn out process of pressing charges and it took a year for the case to go to the DA. My daughter had to go in and testify that something happened to her, anything. All she had to do was say, he touched me, anything. But my daughter she was always more of an introverted wallflower type child. I mean, she was the kid that I would take her out in public and have her on my hip, and a stranger would be like, oh, you're so cute, and kind of reach out to go coochie coo, and she would draw back like, don't touch me,
Yes, yeah.
And she had always been that way. Mm-hmm. So now this was like, it was, I would say 10 times more so at this point. And so I'm taking her to the DA's office, trying to get, find out how we can get some justice here. And come to find out, he was already in jail for a parole violation.
Wow.
So this entire time that I'm going through this whole year with my daughter and everything, he was locked away, and Spirit had told me that. And then it was confirmed when we started going to the DA, and I was like, okay, yeah, I already knew that. He's like, how did you know? And I was like, well, I just knew. I just knew. Anyway, of course, this all brought up my own trauma, right?
Yes.
The things that I didn't feel like I had really dealt with, or I didn't really know how, I guess, because I didn't have guidance. It was like, what does this look like? Because soon after, like I said, I rebelled from Spirit. So that was my only answer. Like the only guidance that I would have for myself is to go to Spirit, because I didn't have anybody else to talk to. But I had rejected Spirit in my anger. So what happened at that point, when this happened to my daughter and I started going through that and I had no one else to rely on, her father started doubting that it was even true. He wouldn't go to the DA's office with me in support. He started questioning, and then he started saying, I think maybe you're making this up because of what happened to you.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Oh, it was awful. And so where did I have to turn but back to Spirit? And I said, you know what? I know that I've been distant and standoffish, but I know that you're always here for my best good, and you're helping me, and you helped me with my daughter, and I'm grateful, and I'm sorry that I've been an asshole, and I'm sorry that I've ignored you, and I'm sorry that, but I really need your help here because I feel like I'm going to fall apart in the middle of this, and I don't know what this looks like. I don't know how to help my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And Spirit said, you do know how to help your daughter. You've been helping yourself all along. And I'm like, how did I do that? And Spirit reminded me of my creativity, and reminded me of my art, and reminded me of my writing, and reminded me of my poetry, and reminded me that's what I did. When I went into myself, it was like all of a sudden I had this great remembrance in that moment that Spirit showed me the movie of my life, and that I always followed Spirit's direction when it came to helping other people, but how I was healing myself and with Spirit's help was the creativity that was flowing through me to take me deeper into that imagination space of creating my own reality through my art, through my words, through my writing, and channeling for myself. Because, see, I could get clear messages for other people, but when it came to myself, it was always very difficult. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that was my tool. So that's when I started doing, I guess what you could call, I just started doing a lot of that with my daughter. And doing that with her, it was healing me at the same time.
Beautiful.
Because now I was conscious that even when I was drawing these horrific, dark images as a teenager, it was a way for me to express that darkness up and out. It was the energy of that. That's how I was transmuting it. I was expressing it through art.
The purging was coming
Mm-hmm.
through the art.
And it's still very much that, the same to this day. I mean, when, how I heal myself and how I get messages, my modality is to go into that deep creative state. It's to go deep within and express everything, through some form of art. And for me, it shifts. It's all over the place. It could be decorating my home. It could be, finding unique, one-of-a-kind clothing items. It could be drawing. It could be painting. It's, music. It's poetry. I just channel creativity for myself, I guess you could say.
Yes.
That part of Spirit that's just recreating everything new all the time. That's my mode of operation or my modality of how I heal myself. Mm-hmm. And that's the best space for me to be in. And it's also been what has opened me to be able to help other people, is because I don't look at it like, okay, well, this is the cookie cutter, or this is the template, or this is the pattern, and this is how you fix it. Like, I don't see any of it as mechanical. It's very organic mm-hmm. to me, because it came organically to me. The instructions or lessons or information from the outside, being taught by somebody, being led by somebody, was never my way of being. It was like I had to do it my way, through my own unique energy. And so you could say that I'm unique to the point of eccentricity, really. I mean, I've never really had somebody that I could feel like, I never had a counselor. I didn't go to a therapist. I didn't have a mentor, somebody mentoring me through sexual trauma or any of that kind of stuff. And it's not to say that I wouldn't have grabbed a hold of those things. They didn't present themselves to me.
True self-healing.
And that's kind of the mystery. Yeah, absolutely. I know that what happened with my daughter was the big part of it. But after that, it was like it launched me into the hardcore healing of my own trauma and what played out through the years as I was raising her, and how I dealt with my dad, because my dad came to the hospital when my daughter was born, and he came to visit us when she was 2 months old. And all of my remembrance started coming back of what happened to me at 12. And when I asked Spirit about it, was that real? It was confirmed, yes. And then that's when I made the decision that my dad was not going to be a part of my life or my daughter's life. And I cut him completely off. And how I healed with that specific connection with my biological father is I wrote letters to him over and over and over. I never sent them. I just wrote everything down that I needed to say to him that I didn't feel that I could, because it's like I already knew he was not going to own what he did. He was not going to, admit to it. In fact, what had happened during that time period, as I was writing the letters, my stepmom found out, because at some point in that time, I ended up telling my granny. My granny told my mom. My mom kind of had a breakdown. She called my stepmom. They were very good friends. My stepmom and my dad were then separated. And my stepmom goes to tell my brother. And my brother breaks completely down. My stepmom is like, what is going on? And he said, he did it to me too.
Oh my goodness. The plot just thickened.
So he goes into this massive, he lost it. He really had to go get professional help. My stepmom was freaking out. She was apologizing profusely. She's like, oh my gosh, Vanessa, I am the one that woke him up and sent him after you that night. Like, I feel so guilty. And I said, listen, you could not have known. You couldn't have known. Like, you cannot be angry with yourself. You can't beat yourself up. And so I just realized at that point, I think, that even though inside I still felt very broken and I was writing these letters to pull myself back together, that is what helped me to realize that I was way more healed than I realized by talking to the adults in my life at this point when it came out. I had to turn around and heal my mom from her own thoughts about sending me out there and allowing me to go. And my dad died about 6 years ago, and I hadn't had any contact with him. Whether he's here or not, no matter what happens, all of the love is ours, and it belongs to us no matter what.
It's been such a powerful testimony. I'm just like in awe right now. I'm so proud of you. Oh my God. I've got
Thank you.
All over. Yes. You obviously have that relationship with Spirit, and Spirit is what guides you to assist others, on their journey.
Always. And I feel like that's what my experience has been, being able to maintain my identity regardless of my circumstances and what was happening around me. And I feel that that's what I give people, is being able to show them their origin, that part of them, like you said, that part of them that is eternal, it's infinite, it cannot be shifted or changed, or, you know what I'm saying? It's not going to, it remains. It just is.
I really honor you greatly for all that you've done on your own self and all that you've done to help others and in your community. And you really did such a beautiful job of helping your daughter, go through what she went through and overcome it. And you're not just a mother to your children, but you're really that ultimate divine feminine mother, here on earth. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Please let people know how they can connect with you.
Yes, everybody can connect with me on Facebook, just facebook.com/The Absolute Alchemist. And if you are interested in booking a session with me, I'm still doing individual readings right now. You can just message me there on Facebook.
perfect. Thank you again, Vanessa.
You are officially a part of the Sacral Circle Sisterhood/Brotherhood.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I appreciate you.
And thank you to our beautiful listeners for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to the Sacred Stories podcast on iTunes, where you'll find other impactful, inspiring shows. Connect with me via social media. Just search at The Sacral Circle. Your shares and likes are greatly appreciated because they help spread the love. As we say goodbye, always remember to know your worth and continue to love and value yourself wholeheartedly. Peace be in us.